Okay, let's see if there's anybody else here. Okay, welcome to another terrific program at the Merowitz Center. Thanks for joining us. I'm Laura Bryant, and this program is part of the Merowitz Center's Fighting Bigotry and Hatred series. And today we're focusing on the St. Louis Mosaic Project. But before we begin, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to today's highly esteemed program sponsors. In addition to St. Louis Mosaic Project, our thanks go to the ADL Heartland, National Council of Jewish Women St. Louis, and the Jewish Community Relations Council of St. Louis. And to that end, I'm very proud to present Cheryl Adelstein, Deputy Director of the JCRC, which is one of today's sponsors and a valued partner. So thank you for joining us today, Cheryl, and for introducing our guest speaker.
Well, thank you, Laura, for having us be a part of this program. I'm really honored to introduce Betsy Cohen, who's the Executive Director of the St. Louis Mosaic Project, which is a program of the nonprofit World Trade Center of St. Louis, which is within the St. Louis Economic Development Partnership. The St. Louis Mosaic Project is a public-private partnership whose goal is to attract and retain international people to St. Louis, with the goal of the St. Louis region being the fastest growing major metropolitan region for foreign-born people by 2025, just a few years from now. Betsy has had an extensive corporate career in marketing at Nestle Purina before leading the St. Louis Mosaic Project. In addition, she ran a regional network for the St. Louis pet community. She's on the advisory boards for the St. Louis University Chaffetz School of Business and the Washington University McDonald International Scholars Program. And she sits on the Cortex Innovation Community's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. Betsy is a recognized speaker on issues of multicultural inclusion. The St. Louis Business Journal recognized her as a most influential businesswoman, and the YWCA recognized her as a women business leader. She is the author of Welcome to the US, You're Hired, a book designed to assist international people who are authorized to work in the US to find good employment. She is a graduate of Wesleyan College and has her MBA from the Harvard Business School. We are very fortunate to have Betsy Cohen in our region and as part of our St. Louis Jewish community. Betsy, take it away.
Thank you, Cheryl. And I really am appreciative to all the sponsors joining me today to talk about this important topic. And I do expect that you'll have great questions when we get to the end, because there's so many interesting aspects about immigration in our community, locally, at the state and the federal level as well. But imagine this, you may have seen in the news the last day that at Purdue's Western campus, the chancellor there, Thomas Cohen, was giving a graduation talk, and he started using fake Chinese language, mocking the Chinese language during his graduation speech. It's been on CNN all over in the last day. This is just an incredible representation of the kinds of racism and bigotry that are rampant, even in our current communities where people try and say they are going to do better and be better. And I will say that Chancellor has put up an apology. He says that the university is open to diversity and equity, but the damage has been done for him, to Purdue's Western campus. And I don't know that he'll keep his job by his, saying these rude things and mocking the Chinese language. And I also think that when people do something like this, it says something about who they are. And it's probably not the first time, much less here he was on the stage at graduation, mocking the Chinese language. So there's a lot to be said. And I'm very glad to be here to talk about fighting bigotry and racism. Next slide, please. What I thought I would talk about is 4 things that I think would be of interest to you. This is a different talk than I usually give, but I put things together that I really hope will inspire you to ask good questions and think about immigration, bigotry, and racism. So I'll say some things about the history of immigration, and then I'll talk about where do bigotry and racism show up, particularly in the work that I do. Why was the Mosaic Project started, and what is it all about, and how is it making a difference to the region? And then why did I write a book this past year to make a difference and help people nationwide who are job hunting? Why did I do it? And you may have some thoughts and questions about that as well. Next slide, please. So thinking about immigration, we know that if someone is not a Native American from a Native tribe here, that we all have stories where we've had immigration to the country and to St. Louis. And St. Louis has had, again, a long history, like our whole country, with waves of immigrants from Europe and then later from all over the world. And, basically at the turn of the century in the 1900s, half of the people in the region were actually immigrants. And then those numbers have gone down greatly. Right now, the national number for immigration is 14% of the country is immigrants, and we'll talk about that later. But St. Louis always has had waves of immigrants. Certainly in the years around World War II, we had more of the Jewish people who were immigrants here from different countries in Europe. And that was a wave that particularly the Jewish community has had lots of experience with. The Vietnamese people that came in the 70s to the St. Louis region, that was part of a large group that came to our country in the 70s. Then the Bosnians. The Bosnians came in the 1990s over about a 9-year period. And again, we'll talk about that on a different slide, but they were a large group that came, and then there were secondary migration of other Bosnians from around the country that did come to the St. Louis region because they heard about how well the Bosnians in St. Louis were doing. And so that was a very important wave of immigration that really does relate right now to what's happening to the Afghans and the Ukrainians that are here. I think it's interesting on the right that one of the pioneer Jews of St. Louis was a native of Bohemia, who was reported to have settled here in 1816. And I think that possibly in some of the documentaries about the region, there may be earlier Jewish people that immigrated to the region. But again, there was other stories that have said from Saigon and Sarajevo to St. Louis, refugees revived our city. I do want to spend a moment talking about the Afghans and the Ukrainians, because these groups have gotten a lot of attention, and you probably have read about it in the paper. You may know some of the congregations that are being helpful in different ways to people from Afghanistan and from the Ukraine. What's really important to understand is that when the Afghan people came, this was part of a military operation, foreign policy of the United States, that we made a decision that because of the work that people did in Afghanistan to help us, we had an obligation to help them leave the country, because if we didn't honor that, as we go into other countries with other military needs, nobody will help us. And so that was a military operation where the US brought out 70,000 Afghan people on our own planes. They came directly to a number of military bases around the United States. And then they were brought to, in general, they came to our refugee resettlement agencies around the country, including the International Institute of St. Louis. Some of them came through individual sponsorships if they knew somebody, but in general, they came officially through our resettlement agencies. And so our International Institute has a staff of close to 100 people. They offer many services with English, citizenship, job training, microloans, and they do refugee resettlement. And so they pick up the people at the airport. They get them into housing for their first 90 days. They help them get started on their path. And that's professional case management that brings those people from the airport into an apartment, or in some cases, they had to go to extended stay hotels because there weren't enough housing available right in the fast pace when people came a year ago. But that's an official way they came through the military and then through the resettlement. The Ukrainian situation is quite different. Because all the resettlement agencies were busy doing that, when President Biden made the decision that we needed to quickly help bring people from the Ukraine here, he used a method that in some ways was used after World War II in this country, and most recently Canada had been using with the Syrians, which was private sponsorship. And so that means that the Kravitz family and the Cohen family could put together a request. We go online, we put in that we financially could support a family for up to 2 years, and we get approved, and then we either know someone in the Ukraine or we get matched with somebody from the Ukraine, and then we have to pick them up. We pick them up at the airport. You know, Paul and the Kravitz family get the kids enrolled. My husband and I figure out their medical. We maybe call the International Institute for some help with the paperwork, but it's all on the backs of individuals and groups of individuals who sign up for those Ukrainian people. And you may have seen in this week's Jewish Light a story about a woman, Grace Cohen, not related to me. She's a young woman, a graphic designer. She requested and got Anastasia, another young woman from the Ukraine that she met online, and they did the paperwork, and Anastasia is now here, sponsored by Grace personally, and Grace is doing everything as this young woman looks to get a job. So it's very different and not at all like the regular refugee process of immigration. We also have refugees from all over the world that continue to come, and President Biden has said that we will have 125,000 in this year that we're in right now. And that's on top of other Afghans and Ukrainian people that will continue to come. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk about some of the things that I have learned about barriers and bigotry. And often I hear people say, well, Betsy, you know, we're welcoming, the country's welcoming, you know, we all were immigrants, so we all should be welcoming. Well, over the history, when you truly look back on it, what often happens is that one group gets settled and they do not want the next group. And we've seen this over decades and centuries where when one group comes, they're like, I'm fine, and I don't want that next group. And so there has been bias against each group that has arrived in our country. And then as they assimilate, they become part of what we see as America. And then when the next group comes, you'd think they would say, oh, you know, let's be welcoming, but often it really doesn't work that way. And so there are true barriers with each group as they come. And some of the local people are going to be welcoming, but many are going to say, why do we need them? We're all fine. And so the country has not always been that welcoming, I guess is what I want to say. And while people can individually be welcoming, groups can be welcoming, often each group has to fight its own battles, and then it does become assimilated over time. And then we have another group that comes. There are many issues of names, cultures, religions, language. And these are things that affect how easy it is for one group or an individual to come. But like we've seen with Asian hate, and even with this chancellor making these rude mockery of the Chinese language, you think these things would go away, and that, you know, at least educated people would learn, if not uneducated people. But it doesn't work that way. You know, there are these long-term issues that resonate, and it's very hard as bad ideas and stereotypes get passed down about names and cultures and religions and language that take a long time to work their way out. We know that there are official covenants that have been in communities and clubs and neighborhoods, and then they become unofficial, whether it's redlining of neighborhoods or other ways that people think who belongs, who does not belong. And, you know, we can say that we've gotten rid of official barriers, but often unofficial barriers still remain. And I think that's across all these different dimensions. So, you know, we do get better and we all become more aware of these things, but it doesn't disappear. One of the things that is fascinating to me working in immigration in St. Louis is when time I say that I'm working on immigration, 100% of the time, the sentence that I hear out of someone's mouth, no matter who that person is the Bosnians did well, others will do well. So overall in our community, there often is this cheery view and very optimistic view that the Bosnians did well, so others will do well. And that has served us very well. And there are a number of things about the Bosnian community that help them. And, you know, in the questions and answers, we can talk about it, you know, further, but it's very interesting because, you know, in some ways the Bosnians have more of an Eastern European background. The country and their culture is more similar to some of the things that the European country background people in our country and in St. Louis were familiar with. And they had the benefit of being white. And the way our government classifies everybody from the Mideast, interestingly, is classified as white, but the Bosnians physically appear white. And that is definitely an advantage, as we all understand the biases and bigotry against people of color of all types. And the fact that the Bosnians were white gave them a head start in getting accepted into our community. The fact that they were Muslim, in general, was accepted. They formed mosques. They had their own religious traditions, and now we have many mosques in our region. Some from the Bosnian communities, from the Palestinian communities, from other communities, and now the Afghan communities. But the fact that they came, they did well, they were viewed as hardworking, they brought skills and some trades, and they did well, has set a culture for our region that has made our region overall very accepting. And there's a new book out about Bosnians in St. Louis, which I encourage you to read because it's fascinating how the Bosnians helped each other, but the community also really did embrace the Bosnians. And again, I bet everyone on this phone call will say, oh yeah, I had a Bosnian did some work for me and they were great. And that really, again, it shows the Bosnians have done well. And as they have risen in their socioeconomic well-being, they often have moved further west out of the city. They've moved South City to South County to West County. And that's often the path that new immigrants had, that they start off and then they do better. And then they go where they're going to have more housing, better neighborhoods, better schools, and they have the freedom of choice. So what we now have in our region is a situation where we as a region have stagnant population. And I'm sure you've all read about this, that we are not a growing region. And this is a problem. It's a problem for individuals. It's you're trying to get your children or grandchildren to move to St. Louis. As we have businesses, people want to be in places that are growing. And we have a stagnant population and a stagnant growth. And that is hurting our economics, and it's hurting our growth of our population and the people that are here. Next slide, please. So one of the things I saw was a quote from Stacker, which I thought was interesting, relating to what I just said. And we're going to talk about the people who are coming. Each era of immigration has been met with reductive ideas and resistance, whether the backlash was directed toward the Chinese, Irish, Italians, or Mexicans. Immigration laws have targeted specific groups at various times, stoking intolerance, preventing people from truly joining American society. Over time, however, as laws changed to be more equitable and immigrants found their footing, we have reaped the rewards of innovation in business, music, art, literature, dance, food, societal norms, entertainment, sports, all while realizing a greater understanding and respect of and for different cultures, religions, and ideas. So what I wanted to share with you is when I say to groups of people, who do you think has the most immigrants in our region? What group? Usually people say Bosnians, people born in Bosnia. But the answer for what is our largest foreign-born group in our region is India. And actually this number just went up in some data that was released in the last week from the American Community Survey data. So the largest group in the St. Louis metro area of foreign-born people by country of birth is India. Second is Mexico. Third is China. And fourth is Bosnia. And this is by people who were born in that country. And you'll say 8,000. How could that be that there are only 8,000 people that were born in Bosnia? And that this is something that's really interesting because you'll see in the news, like they'll say, well, we have 50,000 Bosnians. We should bring 50,000 Afghans. And it's fascinating because we do not have 50,000 people that were born in Bosnia living in this area. And people confuse foreign born with the size of a community. And so basically what we do think is that this data of 8,000 or 9,000 people born in Bosnia is who was born in Bosnia. It's not the size of the Bosnian community, which includes their spouses, children, grandchildren. And so, for example, we do think the Bosnian community is close to 40,000. But that shouldn't be confused with the fact that there might be closer to 10,000 in the region who are actually born there. So, it's just something to keep in mind. The other thing about this data is, so for example, Mexico has 14,000, but when you think about all of our pan-Latin, it would be many more from many more countries that are Hispanic, not just Mexico. So our pan-Asian or our pan-Hispanic numbers are going to be much bigger. But when you think about what country that we have people from, it's India. And this is very interesting because I'll be announcing some new plans in the next month where we are looking to have some attraction plans to attract more Indian people who live around the United States to move to St. Louis. We already have an attraction plan in place called St. Louis Para Ti, which is St. Louis for You, which is about attracting Hispanics into the open jobs that we have. And the International Institute, working with Jerry Schlichter and Sue Schlichter and others, have a credible plan to attract more Afghans to the region. And you may have read about this, that Jerry Schlichter and others, but mostly Jerry and Sue Schlichter, have been so instrumental in putting together a $1 million plan with the International Institute to attract secondary migration of Afghan people. And it includes an Afghan Chamber of Commerce, an Afghan Community Center, laptops, information for soccer for the kids, job training, computer training, a housing fund. And the Afghans that we have had is about 700 that have come in the past year. There are about 300 more that are expected to come in the next few months from Albania. And right now, I believe about 150 additional Afghan people have come to St. Louis from other parts of the United States, secondary migration, because of this plan at the International Institute to build on the number of Afghans that we have. So the region is working hard to build on those people who are here to attract others. Next slide, please. So what happens when you're a stagnant region? When I started the St. Louis Mosaic Project 10 years ago, leaving after I left my corporate career, we were 19th largest metro. Now we are the 21st largest metro, and we are heading to be the 30th largest. And that's not good. If you're Washington University attracting students or faculty and staff, if you are Emerson or Centene and you're trying to hire people and they look and say, oh, you're not in the top 20? How do you think that makes people feel when they want to move their family to a region? If you are declining as a region, it is not good. So one of the issues is that the foreign-born percentage nationwide is 14%. Chicago's 19%. New York, LA are above 30%. Actually, Kansas City is 9%, and we have been at about 5%. And really, that was why work that Bob Fox and others did in 2012 with a research study done by St. Louis University and funded by the William T. Kemper Foundation of Commerce Bank. The study said you should hire somebody who is a marketing expert to help us attract more foreign-born people to the region. And that was how the St. Louis Mosaic Project was born, when I was hired in 2013 to really market the region and help us grow the foreign-born population. We as a region have to work on our native-born community, the 95%. I mean, a lot of people are working to make our 95% better. But I and others in the community are saying, how do we grow that 5% so that we have more foreign-born people here? And that will both help our region, and it will also make us more multicultural and make us a more attractive place for people to want to relocate or for our children and grandchildren to live if we do a better job growing the multicultural, the global, and truly, if we could get ourselves back in the top 20. But Orlando, Nashville, Austin, all these places, they're growing, and we in the St. Louis region are losing out. And it's a big regional problem, but this is one slice. This 5% is one slice that I can work on, and many of you could be helpful as we think about also how do we become a more welcoming place and have programs and attitudes that will be more welcoming so that we can grow. Next slide, please. So I want to tell you two stories about things that we do at the Mosaic Project. Overall, my team, which is 3 people at the World Trade Center, there are 3 of us. We work with 17 universities and their career services to help their international students, help advise them on how they make local connections and can be hired potentially by companies. We educate companies on how do you hire STEM workers. We help international business people who are being transferred here and who have spouses so that they can more successfully integrate quickly into the St. Louis region. So there's an international spouse program that has over 700 international women that all connect with each other. There's an international men's program, and then there's something called the International Mentor Program, which was started by Annie Schlafly, who many of you may know. And Annie has local women, it could be any of us, and we're matched one-on-one with one of the women who has moved here through the university or through the companies. And you basically are a buddy, and you meet once a month for a year in the International Mentor Program. This is not with refugees or people who have come that are just getting settled in our country, but this is with people who have moved here because they're a professor or they're with a company and they want to have a local buddy for the year. And it really makes them love St. Louis. And for the local women, it makes them more global. And for the global women, it makes them more connected to the local communities. So that's been very successful as a program. We've been helping refugees from Afghanistan and the Ukraine, and we now are launching these attraction plans for the Hispanic community and the Indian people moving here. But what I thought you would enjoy is 2 stories. One of them is about Valley. And Valley was rescued in the military operation a year ago in 2021. He came from Afghanistan. In Afghanistan, he was working at the hotel in Kabul that served the American military people. So he was an accountant at the hotel that served American military. He came here by himself. He was put in an extended stay hotel. The International Institute found an apartment for him, and he was job hunting. His English is good. He has a master's, he has a bachelor's degree and had started working on a master's. And our Mosaic Professional Connector Program made a connection for him with the Ritz-Carlton. I know the general manager of the Ritz-Carlton, and I called her and I said, Amanda, this man speaks English. He was an accountant at a hotel. Do you have any accounting jobs at the Ritz? And she said, we do. They interviewed him 1 week. They made him an immediate offer, and he started there. And he is loving working for the Ritz, and the Ritz is really happy to have him. And the Ritz-Carlton has so many open jobs, and they're hoping that Valley will encourage other Afghan people to take jobs at the Ritz. And so that's how it works. The second story that I wanted to tell you is about Olga. And Olga was a medical doctor who headed a fertility clinic in Kyiv. And when she came to St. Louis about 2 years ago, she came before the war. She got married to a man in St. Louis, but in this country, she can't be a medical doctor because she'd have to go back for a residency, which she's not going to do. So we made introductions to different of our fertility groups in St. Louis. The Washington University fertility group had an opening literally for a scheduling, billing, medical technician, and they hired her. And she is loving working for that fertility clinic. And in fact, they recently had a lunch to support the Ukrainian effort for her. They invited me. They had Ukrainian food. She was overwhelmed. But this is what happens when people come and they have to start over. But what the Mosaic Project does is we can make professional introductions, because by herself, Olga was sending out resumes that didn't look right, and she didn't have any introductions or connections. And what the Mosaic Project did, we opened those doors for her. And every week we get requests from 2 or 3 foreign-born people who are work authorized, speak English, they have a good resume, and we help them network to find a job so that they can be productive, so that they will love St. Louis, and they will tell other people, come to St. Louis, we were successful, and you will be successful too. Next slide, please. And this on one page is an infographic about the impact of the Mosaic Project. We have an ambassador program that you can see on the left, where we have individuals who are ambassadors and spread goodwill about our region being welcoming. We have 108 Mosaic ambassador schools that are K through 12, and we convene them once or twice a year to help them to be more welcoming to their foreign-born families and staff. We have 51 ambassador companies. Actually, you may have seen in the news this week, the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis is our newest Mosaic ambassador organization. And that means that they are welcoming to foreign-born people they hire and what they do that's global. We have our connector program in the middle, like Valley and Olga. The social connector programs are for the women that are meeting each other and meeting local women. The global talent hiring on the lower left is our international student. I have a steering committee that meets every quarter, and we also help immigrant entrepreneurs and connect them to things like funding and mentors and places where they can get entrepreneurship training. So in some ways, the three of us are like concierges. We're navigators. We market the region, tell the stories so that our region can truly be successful. Next slide, please. So what have been the results after 10 years? We have added our foreign-born population, but we haven't added enough to be the fastest growing yet. There were studies that were released this week by the George W. Bush Center at SMU University, and they basically said that St. Louis is number 6 in the top 10 regions for being welcoming and that immigrants can thrive. And we are so happy about that, but we are not growing fast enough. Other places are still growing faster than we are. So we are being successful, but not successful enough. And it's really important to understand that St. Louis as a region has a lot of challenges, and we can't solve the region's problems by working on the 5%. All of us need to understand we have racial issues, racism and bigotry, like the topic that we're dealing with today, that involve our Black and white communities, issues of education, poverty, crime. And so certainly we have to focus on the 95% of our region that is native born and that definitely needs help and support so that we can grow. And as we work on the 95%, some of us can work on that 5%. Many of you have been involved or could be involved helping newcomer families through the International Institute. There's an organization called Welcome Neighbor. There's an organization called BIAS, Bilingual International Assistance. There's also Oasis House of Goods. Groups like Home Sweet Home, Betsy Resnick, are helping refugee families, and people are volunteering and donating there. And people reach out to many of us and say, how can I help? Some of the people that we connect to these mentor programs, we assign buddies to and mentors. The International Institute, for example, needs people to help with practice interviews. You can sign up for episodic help to help people practice their interview skills at the International Institute. So there are a number of places, and you're welcome to reach out to me if you have ideas about how you could help or mentor in ways, or financially, or with your services or your ideas. There are a lot of ways to help. And it could be through your congregation as well. And at Temple Emmanuel, we've been having a speaker series about refugees and immigration, and we've had collections of items for the International Institute. And I know many of our congregations have done that as well and are helping families and groups, Ukrainian groups, Afghan groups, and these organizations. And I'm so appreciative of how so many of you have been really helpful. It's also possible to be an ally with many forms of learning about how to be an ally. And there are organizations right now through JCRC that are working with Hispanic Jewish Dialogues group. There's a new Asian Jewish Dialogue group. We have in the past had certainly African American Jewish dialogue groups. All the ways that we learn about each other, form relationships, meet people one-on-one, that breaks down stereotypes, breaks down biases, helps us understand how we can learn from each other. And we help each other, we benefit each other. And the more we learn to do that, when one group has a problem, the other group will stand by them. And we've seen that always, that having allies, whether they're immigrants with those of us that were born in the country or they're by ethnicities, the more we build friendships and allies, the interfaith partnership is a terrific way that allies get built. This is a really important way that we build bonds and we reduce the kinds of bigotry and ignorance that get in the way of our advancing as individuals or as communities. Next slide, please. And then you might say, Betsy, you wrote a book. How did that happen? And really what happened is during the pandemic, I felt like I was limited in what I could do and how could I make a bigger difference in the world? And based on all the work I publish on LinkedIn about how to help people find jobs like Olga and Valley, a lot of the foreign-born people said, Betsy, write a book. And I never thought I would write a book. Last year in March, I started writing a book and it was launched on Citizenship Day in September 2021. And it's called Welcome to the USA, You're Hired, a guide for foreign-born people seeking jobs. It is the only book on the market for foreign-born people seeking jobs. There are chapters, and I had people contribute who are experts from the International Institute about refugees finding jobs. I had someone contribute on international students finding jobs, on business people and their spouses, on corporations, on what to do. I had interviewing experts. I had Kathy Bernard, who's a LinkedIn expert, many contributors to the book. And it really focuses on helping empathize for foreign-born people, the stress for them when they're looking for a job. Should they use a nickname or not because of the biases and the bigotry I talked about earlier? How do they manage the American interview situations? Can you negotiate a salary in the United States? Their home country, it could be different. And I give them advice on how do you do that? How do you talk about getting a promotion and what does it take to get a promotion? With my work at Nestle, I mentored many international people and I know some of the things that they can do to have better awareness so that they can get promoted. How do you form relationships? And then job resources. So it's been very exciting to be an author. And this book has gotten great receptivity around the country. And I do webinars and I have done visits with universities and employment groups. Lots of employers have contacted me because they want to employ more foreign-born people. And they know that the knowledge I have, when they can see the barriers that people face, if they understand the barriers, they think they will become a better employer. So I may do a second volume or a pamphlet for the employers saying, if you want to be a better employer, these are the barriers that your candidates are going through when they try and use your application online. It may ask for the zip code. They don't have a zip code from the Ukraine. What are they going to do? And they can't even fill out the application form. So there are many things that I am now being asked to advise companies and individuals and organizations on finding jobs. And what was important to me last year was we had a new president in 21 who was going to make immigration more acceptable than the prior president. We had low unemployment and we were getting vaccinated. So people were going to go back to interviews and go back to the workplace in person. And I felt that if I could launch the book quickly, it would be the right time. And it really was. There has been no pushback against it. People know we need foreign-born people, whether it's STEM workers, agricultural workers. We have so many jobs. Actually, last week, an organization in St. Louis called Tech STL launched a website. It has 5,000 open tech jobs. And so we need technology workers, and we can't grow enough of them in our K through 12 fast enough for all the technology jobs. So it's really important to our country and to our state and to St. Louis that we do everything we can to help individuals be productive and not waste their talent of these work authorized legal people in our country who are legally authorized to work, and help them get jobs so that they can be productive and our region can grow. And that's what I added. And my employer has been very understanding that as I talk about what we've done in St. Louis that yielded this knowledge, it reflects well on St. Louis as well. And so they are supportive of my book and the talks that I give, because it's also a halo and makes St. Louis look good, because this all came out of learning with what we do in St. Louis. So, you know, if you know people that are trying to hire, or you know someone that needs to look for a job, this is the book for them. You can get it at Left Bank Books online, or at Left Bank Books if you want to support local, but it's also available on Amazon and other online retailers. And I'm happy to give talks about interviewing. both to employers and to people that need the information. So you're welcome to follow up with me at any time, and they'll share my email as well. So I think the last slide is really about any sort of follow-up and ways that we can have a discussion. My contact information is here, and I'm very accessible. The website for the Mosaic Project has a lot of information. You can reach me at the World Trade Center, and that's my number. And I'm open for questions now. If you want to put them in the chat, if you want to, Laura can take the picture down if she'd like. And if you want to turn on your cameras, if you have thoughts or questions or ideas about, bigotry and welcoming of immigrants, I would be most interested and open to any of your questions or ideas. So please share with me what your thoughts are.
Hey, Betsy, while we're waiting for everybody to gather their thoughts, I just wanted to thank you. You were talking about how to make St. Louis look good. And I have to tell you, I think you personally make St. Louis look good because you represent a wonderful mindset, and you're just setting an example for all of us, and it's really inspiring.
Well, I thank you. And, I guess I get inspired both by the individuals that I know in this community that help with their time and their money and their care. And I also am very inspired by the individuals that have overcome odds and come here and make it because they're resilient. And I think back to my ancestors, and I think back of all of your ancestors that I just know, it makes a difference, and it makes a difference for all of us. And I really am grateful for the sponsors of today for making this opportunity for me to share this with all of you. Thoughts, questions?
Yes. Okay, so you responded. What I was going to tell everybody, I can take that last slide of yours
Great.
and send it out via email to everybody.
That'd be great.
So that they have it. Okay, so that'll make it easy for everybody.
Anyone have questions about how things in St. Louis are working, or how refugees and immigration is working in the state or the federal or globally? Because I'm here to share, and I see a number of friends in the audience who I know have had interest in this topic.
Betsy, it's Paul.
Hi, Paul.
So a question for you. The headlines are currently of the tens of thousands of immigrants coming across the border from Central and America, from Mexico. Is that helping you or hurting you? How does that impact on your efforts here in St. Louis?
Well, we as a country have not wanted to address any of the immigration issues and things we even thought President Biden and Congress would deal with. They have not. And so we have failed to decide how to manage our southern border. And so as people have come, there's just a hodgepodge of things that happen with so much of the brunt, which is borne at the border. And I know St. Louis people have traveled to the border to be helpful to migrants that are at the border, but these undocumented people who are filing for asylum, it's very complicated. The asylum process, that is important that we honor. People come and then they do migrate. We have families here in the region that have come from south of the border to be with family and relatives, but again, often they're in the shadows because they're undocumented and they can't be work authorized and have the official ability to look at certain kinds of jobs. So it's something that our country has to deal with at some point. And again, we will all be better served when we decide for the DACA dreamers, the young people brought here as children, what we do to understand and I hope find the right way to make them here legally, as well as we deal with the border and people seeking asylum from all over the world, how we deal with it. But we as a region and the whole country would be better if we found agreed upon legal solutions to deal with these issues. Other thoughts or questions? I know it's a complicated, at the big levels, it's complicated. And at the one-on-one level with people that you might meet or know, it's very personal. Laura's got a son-in-law who is foreign born, and many people have foreign born people in their families and or have helped people or neighbors or known people, and it's very personal. Any other final thoughts or questions? It's a very personal. I don't know. Lee, did you raise your hand? I wasn't sure if you were asking, you had a question. No. Okay. Anyone else have a thought or a question? Yeah, Janice.
I'm part of a group that's working not through the International Institute, but we're we're sponsored by the State Department. We're working through HIAS, and
Excellent.
it's through Sheremuth, a church, and the Turkish American Society. But I was wondering if your book, what kinds of jobs, we're working with a family that has, the woman was a physician in Afghanistan, but the man is less skilled. He's been working at an kind of a manual labor job. Does your book, what kinds of jobs are in there?
It addresses the process if people are going to be applying with English speaking jobs,
Okay.
applicants, interviewing. So they have to have kind of the ability to be interviewing for English speaking jobs, which again, a lot of people who've come, it takes them a while to get to that point. And so they're going to do manual jobs until they get their English to a sufficient level that they'll be able to interview and do jobs that require English. So that is often the holdup until they get to that point. And so the manual jobs or volunteering or all the things that get their language skills up, and then they would be ready to use the book for, that next level of job.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Paula.
I have a question. Betsy, where do you see the gaps for all of the foreign born that are coming into St. Louis? And I ask you this because here at Thomas Dunn Learning Center, we provide a pretty it's a pretty good high school equivalency program and some life skill classes, but we are in the middle of strategic planning right now. And as we're going through that and looking at our programs a lot closer, I'm just wondering if you see any gaps that aren't being filled in those life skills or high school equivalency areas, especially here in South St. Louis.
Yeah, I mean, the International Institute does a number of training programs. And what really happens for those that come, that because of the way we do refugee resettlement, people after 90 days have to pay all their own bills. So they have to start taking 1 and 2 and 3 minimum wage jobs if they haven't gotten a better job. The Institute really works hard. They're basically at the average salary of about $17 an hour as they work to get people into jobs with benefits and hourly wages and transportation. So it's hard. The people have a hard time because they have to work really hard before they then can address some of those other skills and needs. So it's hard to know where there's the gap. And there's not like a group of them that have a certain need at a certain time for a class, but that's the challenge.
Thank you.
So the question about waiting for citizenship. Normally when people come and they are here as a legal permanent resident, they have to wait 5 years, but I believe for refugees it's 3, and then they can become a citizen. And so the trick for citizenship is it's very expensive. It's about $750 per person. And so, again, people don't have the spare money. And so it's very hard. And only recently have you been able to charge it and pay it on a credit card, but often newcomers don't have credit cards. So citizenship is important. The facts are that about half of our legal permanent residents become citizens, only half, because it's expensive, because they want to keep their other citizenship. In some countries don't let them take dual citizenship, and others just don't know why they would need to, even though for those of us that understand that if they can vote, they become a much more valuable part. So there's going to be more of a push. And right now, this week, President Biden just reinvigorated a task force on new Americans, which had been dead during the Trump years. And it just got reinvigorated this week. And what Biden's task force says is they're going to be focusing on citizenship, because having people understand the value of citizenship and becoming citizens is so important. And I always compare it to, if you have someone living next to you, would you rather have an owner or a renter? And I'd rather have an owner. And so, the more that we can encourage people to become citizens, take an active role, vote, it's important. And we're going to see more of a push around the country to find the funding and to help people understand what it takes to become a citizen.
Hey,
Yes,
Betsy,
it's
could I ask one more question?
certainly.
Are you finding that other cities are taking an interest in your book and your message? Because I would think there are many leaders outside of St. Louis who would say, hey, this is really great stuff.
Yes, yes, definitely. It's a national book. The people who contributed are national. And I've been doing webinars and talking to groups all around the country. And actually, most recently, you may have seen that in the technology field, 120,000 tech workers lost their jobs,
Right.
Google, Twitter, in the last month. And out of the 120,000, 10%, 12,000 of them have an H-1B visa. They're international people with STEM jobs. And with that visa, you only have 60 days to find a job. And they lost their jobs November 15th, which means they're at 45 days almost already. And so a number of them have been using my book to help them find job, to remind themselves, how do you need to network to find a job, and the skills and the resources. And so I've been doing a lot of webinars and talks about nationwide, helping people that are suddenly having to quickly try and find a job. So definitely the use of it with international students, workers that are being laid off, refugee groups around the country. And I take, on my weekends, I spend time sharing the book, talking about the book off my work hours to let other groups know about it and how it could be helpful.
That's a great story. That's
So,
wonderful.
well, if there's no other questions, I really am appreciative of the sponsors, and I'm appreciative of all the groups and of all of you wanting to learn more about this. And I really do welcome any follow-up ideas you have. And one by one, we each make a difference. And each one of you can make a difference by becoming knowledgeable about it, by meeting someone that's different than you are, by being welcoming to someone that's foreign born, and by helping and supporting many of the organizations in town that are helping these newcomers become productive and really important members of our community. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Betsy, your time. Oh, it looks like maybe, Paul, do you have a question, or are you just waving?
He's just waving.
Waving.
Thanks, Paul.
Okay.
Thanks to all of you.
Just
I
wanted to say
appreciate your
thank you very,
interest.
very much to you and our sponsors, and how much I appreciate everyone's time. So wonderful, wonderful discussion here. Thanks again.
Thank you.